Hi, Lisa.
So thank you for having this conversation today. I want to cover what it's like living with any chronic illness and jobs. It's a very hot topic. I think we just posted an article just starting the conversation. The article that we just posted was from 2019, which is a little concerning. There should be more articles about people working and living with chronic illnesses and in general, like invisible disabilities, invisible illnesses, but that's another conversation. But the reason why I wanted to have Nicole and us to have this conversation is because I met Nicole professionally. She started her own company, and I'll let her state why, but all due to kind of health issues that came up in her life. And for those of you that don't know my background, I've had Crohn's for 30 years. I worked on Wall Street at Goldman. I had a couple other jobs after that. Got pregnant, married, got pregnant, had a family, got really sick. And since then, I've been in entrepreneur land, which is super conducive when you have health issues that you have to manage. But I do think there were some great things that I experienced working in corporate world. Goldman treated me very well at the time, and we'll go into the details why, but I think a lot had to do with my communication about it. And then there's a lot of corporations and business owners, whether you're big or small, that maybe don't navigate that world very well. So the point of this today is to talk about our kind of own little story. So Nicole, I'm going to have you tell your story really quick soon. And then I want to leave with like 3 big takeaways on our advice to give to people when they're going out, whether they're going to change jobs, get new jobs, any medical situations, or, just really, this could really hone down to like anyone evaluating what their goals are in their life, because we all know we're at the job so much and we work so much. That's so much part of our life. I mean, we need to pay our bills, we need to go on vacations, and we need to do that by paying money. And, it's such a hot topic. And I think that anyone, whether you have a medical issue now or not, chances are you're probably going to experience either yourself or a loved one. And so this starts the conversation. So anyway, Nick.
Absolutely. And it's going to be so interesting to share between one another, both experiences, because while there are a lot of similarities, we did come across a lot of differences. And what I find so beautiful about that is that everyone's situation is unique. So a little bit about mine. I started in corporate America at an advertising agency in 2012, 8 months after I graduated college. So even the job search was a challenge for a recent grad. So finally securing a job, I put a lot of eggs in that basket and wanted to overperform really, and, be the best and do the best that I could, which is partially my personality, but also, what we're taught in terms of drive and, especially in the Northeast in New York City.
What success is.
The grind. Success is the grind. Yeah. And over the course of the just under 10 years I was at this particular job, I personally was going through a lot of ups and downs with anxiety and depression. Also really just discovering that I had anxiety and depression in these circumstances. And by circumstances, I just mean what should have been work, regular job, like everyone has. And some of the things that we're going to get into will really shed light on the ebb and flow of that experience. But really, I think the synthesis of what I want to share is I realized early on, but waited too long to act, that there was a disconnect between what work should have felt like or could have felt like and what was actually happening. as a millennial in the workforce, and, you know, there is definitely just a difference among my parents' generation, which was stay at a job for 40 years, and my generation, which is really like, well, I'm going to dictate how this goes. So it's kind of finding the balance of the two.
Of the two. Yeah, I'm in the generation in between where you just got a job, you're happy to have a job, and you just worked your butt off. You had to prove yourself. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, we'll dive into the tips, but, you know, at the same time, I talk about this with my parents, and Lisa obviously knows this and is in the same position with her family, that even the conversation of chronic illness and, you know, mental health wasn't a thing. So the fact that it's emerging a bit more, which I'm so grateful for today, is really what led us to have this conversation.
Yeah, I think that people are more open. There's still a huge amount of hesitancy towards, I mean, you have to really be vulnerable to be able
Majorly.
to, and being vulnerable never feels good. I don't know.
On top of how people are feeling.
Right, right. And you know, with embarrassment, obviously growing up with Crohn's disease, talking about Crohn's, you know, usually involve bathroom issues, which, like, who talks about that? Talk about being vulnerable. And by the way, unladylike, right? So
Totally.
I wasn't one to really mention a lot at first, but for me, my issues became visible to people I worked with when I started to lose dramatic weight. And so people, I think, became very aware that something was going on. But I know I definitely laid the playing field in terms of when I started the job, I knew what the expectations were. I was ready to meet those expectations. I wanted to. I was super excited. I worked crazy hours. But, you know, now I know that obviously that's correlated with health, but I was only like 20, 22, 23 years old. I did what, you know, I thought it was fun. I was with my friends. I worked all hours, but then my health started to deteriorate. And when it did, I was very fortunate that I had relationships with my bosses and my peers that were super supportive and healthy. And I don't know, it's probably a mix of me, the way I communicated it. They knew that, like, I clearly wasn't faking it, right? It was like mental health. There's such a disconnect because of the invisible side of mental health.
Yes.
With Crohn's, like, they visibly saw what was happening. I was getting thinner and thinner. I was drawn. They were great about me going for my infusions at the time. I remember needing to lay down in the middle of the day and going to the nurses area and laying down. They were awesome. And then when I wanted to transfer and actually go to Florida and worked at Goldman in Florida, they were super supportive of that. And I did great for a year or two. And then I had another episode where I got sick in Florida, and my team really rallied. They were amazingly supportive. And that's when, you know, I learned I had short-term disability, and I ended up taking short-term disability. So I have a lot of experience working and having, like, traumatic health things happen. And fortunately, I think I think a little bit is luck, a little bit is my personality. A lot is, I think, the culture of the company. People I was working with were really great. I was fortunate with that, and it just worked out. But I know that you did not have the same luck. And so I think it's important. Why don't you, you know, kind of set the stage for what happened to you and what landed you in the hospital getting sick?
Totally. And, you know, one thing before I dive into the experience in your discussion around Crohn's and bathroom issues, you know, there's no comparison to any illness, mental health condition, whatever the case is, for comparison. There's no room for it. Everyone's experience is wildly different. But I laugh because my anxiety was what gave me bathroom issues. And I bring it up because there were times where I was like, this is not an illness, but this is crazy. So I think the level at which my generation was seemingly expected to perform, which I do think, Lisa, you can relate to, especially in the industry that you were a part of. a lot of times felt really challenging for me from a capacity perspective. I don't deal with a specific medical condition. Anxiety and depression and panic attacks were really, the issues that I was trying to deal with, manage, hide, because I was 24. What problems do I have? I just graduated college. I live in New York City with my best friends. This should be fun. I don't have a family. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have all these challenges and sort of things on my plate. So something is not adding up. And what I would share on the matter is, we've talked about your experience and how supportive Goldman was in your process. And I don't necessarily really know what support I could have received. There were a few times where I felt like my sharing fell on deaf ears.
Was marginalized. Yeah.
Was marginalized. And,
Yeah.
Part of me was like, everyone has anxiety, everyone has depression, or, I should just figure it out. But when you really think about work, it is life. It's life. I mean, we spend a lot of time at the desk, on calls, etc. And with the disconnect between how I was feeling and what I was expected to do, I retreated. I really pulled back and put it all on me, not only managing what I was feeling, not only managing my to-do list, but not looking for the support in a way that would really have improved my situation. I was getting personal support, but there was no overflow into my work life. And I developed a lot of resentments for my colleagues because I expected people to be more gentle with me, but they had no idea what was going on.
That's where the vulnerability comes into play. This is what people don't understand, that you can't, everyone walks around in their own little worlds.
Yes.
Compassion is something, and being empathetic, everyone has to work on. And I think with age, you start to realize like, oh, they have their own stuff and they have their own stuff. When you're in your 20s, like, it's like you have blinders on, you're in your own little world, and you expect people to be able to see into your world without really, opening up the locked doors and being vulnerable. You just think that you could say a couple things and they get it. And that's not the case. So I think you had shared with me that you would say little things, but not fully, explain what exactly was going on in your life. And then all of a sudden you were in the hospital, and, obviously it was stress related, and you were really out for the count, and people just didn't know what to think of it. And I think it's because you didn't include them, from my outsider, on your journey a little bit. And listen, nobody has to, but the reality of it is, if you don't, you also can't expect to be met halfway. 100%. So by all means, you are not, nobody is you're entitled to do what you feel most comfortable with. But you have to keep that in mind. If you restrict, I was young and super naive, and I just, like I do now at my age now, I just said it like it is. I probably could have had some major ramifications. Looking back, if I had the wrong boss, the wrong situation, I could have been demoted. I could have been, passed on some opportunities, which, by the way, looking back, I probably was a little bit, but I guess I just expected the best in everyone. I think everyone naturally does.
Totally.
But you have to keep in mind, I think that's the number one thing, like, people don't know what they don't know. People don't really, especially, we're talking about it now because it's a national conversation ever since post-COVID, but mental health issues, anxiety, these are debilitating.
So real.
And they're real, and they completely can ruin your life. And we know that now. 10 years ago, nobody talked like that. 5 years ago, people didn't even talk like that. So, I completely agree with what you're saying, that you were in your own silo and you expected a different reaction. But I think that people have to pause and just think what you're experiencing is you. And unless you convey more than that, no one knows, particularly with hidden illnesses, right?
Absolutely. And, we've talked about being defined by our condition, or, letting it be
A
the first
label.
thing we lead with. Exactly, our label. And I guess when it comes to mental health, the conversation has shifted to be for mental health to be considered as substantial as I believe it really is, as substantial as a medical condition. And, we've talked about the idea that there is so much happening behind the scenes, and the reminder for the expectation to be lifted around people know what I'm going through. I can't act this way without teeing something up first, without at least prefacing, because to your point around when I ended up in the hospital, it was really jarring for everyone because I was dependable. I always showed up at my expense, but it didn't add up. And I really had to look at that and take responsibility for not doing my part. Even though it was hard, I was getting support from my parents to take time. They're both very familiar with the mental health conversation, and they suggested often for me to take time to heal or rest, recharge, whatever it is, fill my cup. My therapist recommended the same thing, but I could not cross the line and bring those recommendations into work. It was such a challenging feat for me, or at least what felt like it. Some of what we'll offer as solutions really feel like extremely simple things to include in day to day that are game changers. And I will say a pivotal moment for me when I was so burnt out from taking this all on myself. Once I started even slightly sharing, not only did I feel better, but almost everyone I spoke to at my office was going through something. And I was like, I could have saved myself so much pain,
Heartache.
heartache,
Yeah,
suffering.
this is the whole platform of Secret Lemons. Like, the minute you speak up and you're vulnerable, then it gives others the permission to be that way, because
Exactly.
you demonstrated that courage. And
Totally.
so we're like, people are so much more connected than we realize. And I think
Major.
we get in our own way in that regard. I also think that, a lot of people at your age at the time, in your job at the time, I think fear leads a majority of our decisions, particularly like you're on your own, you're paying for rent, you have medical insurance, like all these real life things of being a grown up. And so I believe in financial, empowerment,
Totally.
knowing how to control your situation. So, if you do have to take time off, and I know a lot of people who have, various medical issues, and they've had to quit jobs, they've had to change jobs, they've had to do things, and it is super scary. And not everybody has, like a security net.
Totally.
I ironically, when Steve and I met at work, and we decided, that I'd be leaving and I'd be doing something else. I worked in a different job and we got married. When I got pregnant, which we didn't think could ever happen, so we related when it did. That was a miracle in of itself. We made a very conscious decision as a couple. Now, we were only 26, I think, 27,
Yeah. Wow.
that if that he would always carry the medical insurance and he would always work, because my health was always so unpredictable. So
Totally.
we lived our lifestyle financially depending on one salary. We actually did it even before I was pregnant, because we were so worried if something happened, which, by the way, also helped him. God forbid something would have happened to him.
Of course.
But financial awareness, and being like educating yourself is important. The medical insurance, that's a huge part of it. This is a big topic. jobs are everything, not just the financial side. It's also how we feed ourselves and doing a job that you're passionate about, that you love. So not to bring it back, but I know we posted like a handout, the wellness check-in. I believe on that wellness check-in is about like identifying stressors, right?
Totally.
And some of the things that I've learned about in my life. So I did enjoy my short experience at Golden. I really did enjoy it. That didn't feed my soul by any means. I did enjoy it and had fun, and I learned a ton. But when I started Ostomy Secrets, I worked probably, I mean, I worked a lot.
Double.
I worked triple the hours. I literally didn't go without my computer for like 5 years when I started Ostomy Secrets. I worked all the time, and it did not negatively impact me. Why? Because I was doing something I was passionate about and I loved.
Totally.
So it's not necessarily, I think it's realizing with people, the way I'm raising my kids is that don't go into a career for the money. I mean, obviously you have to be financially aware to be able to support yourself, but how you react to stress. Some people work at these organizations or work at not-for-profits, and you would think they're so happy, and they're miserable. Maybe they're not doing something they're passionate about. So I think that that's another thing that to be considered, but this is all kind of going back to taking inventory of what's stressing you out. And I think for you, you had shared, you had these underlying propensities for anxiety and depression. So that's right out of the gate, right? And then you add anything in your life that happens on top of the expectations you had on the job. I think it was just it was a tornado waiting to happen.
And, to your point about work being more than just the financial aspect, there was a time in my 9 to 5, for lack of a better description, career where I was in therapy 3 times a week, and taking time off translated to me as I don't get therapy anymore because what happens to my insurance?
Yeah.
So it's a really tricky conversation and decision to navigate. And in hindsight, there were solutions, and that's what sharing earlier or being more vulnerable would have opened my eyes to. But in the moment, you're scared enough, you're in enough pain, you're overwhelmed enough to make the decision to quit, take time off, share with your boss, communicate your reality. It's so much. It feels like so much,
Like so much. Yeah. Yeah.
but really and I would tell my former self that was the answer. And, 2020's hindsight, and I really wouldn't change anything, but the wisdom I would share is, you're not alone, and people are in this conversation, whether it's behind closed doors or they've become vulnerable enough about it already.
Imagine if the first thing I would advise is kind of own your shit, right?
Major.
Like come to the table. So for me, knowing my limitations are even more now than they were 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I know that an extreme work day, like I used to do, 8 a.m. to midnight or 11 p.m. is not really conducive to a good physical, having an overall balanced physical life, right? No matter how much I love it, number one. So I would say advise and having people, their expectations have to meet the job and what your body can do realistically. And only you can answer that.
100%.
Right. The other thing is that I do think that your stages in life, so what you do in 22 or 23 may be very different than what you do in 35. Maybe you've gotten married now, maybe you have kids, maybe you want to have a family. And so that job is going to shift and change. And so you have to be open to having the conversation with yourself first.
Totally.
It's kind of like what I had shared about my husband and I. When we got together, we knew what we were going to live on one salary. We knew that when I got pregnant, I was probably going to have some issues, and we couldn't rely on a salary for me. And we didn't know what that meant after the pregnancy, which thank God, because I got so sick after I had my daughter. I don't know what we would have done if we were dependent on that salary. So we were pretty realistic in our expectations. Him and I are pretty conservative that way. So I would say, to everyone out there listening to this, be realistic in your expectations, because whatever job is at hand, whatever industry, know what is expected and make sure you can reach those expectations, and be honest with yourself. You're not a failure if you can't. It just doesn't meet your expectations. I think the other thing too is communication is key. Communication, not just being vulnerable, being honest with them, because if you're honest with them and you lay the groundwork, and you you lay the groundwork, you put your time in, things are going great, and then you get sick or some event happens,
there's
you
clarity.
already put your time in. And you could say, remember I said, actually this happened to me in Florida. So remember when I mentioned I had this thing? That's why I'm losing weight again. I made light of it, even though it was a serious conversation, but I put my time in. They knew I was a hard worker. They knew I wasn't like taking time off here and there. I wasn't a partier. I legitimately came to the forefront and was like, this is the situation at hand. They were great and they were realistic. Like, this is a business. We need you to show up. I was getting so sick that's when we made the decision for me to take short-term disability. Totally. And that was fair because they're a business.
Absolutely.
This is a job. People have to make money. And I think that we, as the population of people who deal with chronic illness or whatever you bring to the table, whatever your health issue is, mentally, physically, or emotionally, I think that we need to realize that. We need to realize that there's a contract on their end and there's a contract on our end.
Absolutely.
And those two parties have to agree. And when they don't agree or match anymore, then it's time to move on. It's not anyone's fault. And if you communicate appropriately, then the moving on part ends up being not so traumatic. You don't leave on bad terms. And quite honestly, maybe leaving ends the people that you left, maybe it teaches them a lesson.
Absolutely. And, on that note of communication, just going back to really owning our own shit, no pun intended for us, Lisa. But, that's where that checklist you mentioned comes in, because there are weeks where my anxiety and I will really just say my anxiety and panic are at bay, but I'm just burnt out because I haven't checked in with myself. I'm overcommitting. Maybe I went to a couple extra happy hours than I typically do. And that's different than a chronic condition or health issue that needs a different type of care. So, really what I would like to caution is use that resource, use that check-in to really identify where you are. We talked about it's on us to own it. It's on us to understand what the baseline is, to then communicate. Because if we're communicating about taking off every Friday after Thursday happy hour, hello, let's, and that's, I think, with anything, we want to create a safe container for people to feel comfortable and supported. And in your sharing your story with me, the communication was key in how you survived.
Yeah, but that brings me to the next point. So part of the communicating is the educating. So when we communicate, like our situation, however TMI, right? However much you feel that you could be vulnerable or honest about it.
Yes.
Obviously in my world, I've gotten nothing but positive feedback. I mean, a few times I've had some weird responses to my story and I just kind of chalk it off like that person's going through something. That's about them, not me.
Totally.
But almost always when we show up and we convey our story in a very well-intended way, people respond positively and they want to engage, they want to learn about why it is this happened, how did this happen? And I think that when we stand up, then our peers, other employees will, and most importantly, companies are going to start to recognize maybe there's been a trend of a culture in the group or the company that's unhealthy. Maybe we need to address that. Maybe there's too many projects being taken on collectively that will help the group. Maybe there's one person that's toxic and is not leading the way the company wants. Or maybe the company just needs to be educated in this situation that, they're, what is it? More than 50% of all Americans suffer with some type of
one or more
chronic, one or more.
One or more chronic. Yeah.
Okay, that's crazy. So this is very present. And think about all the people that, because I know people who are very intelligent, very talented, and they are afraid to put themselves out there professionally because they've had so many bad experiences. And so I really lean into the fact that I would love for this to be escalated in a bigger platform.
Absolutely.
For these companies to, we lean in about all these leadership conferences. We do all this discrimination training, HR stuff about, Black Lives Matter and women's issues and all that. I think it's maybe slightly touched upon, anybody with invisible disability, but not really, really, not that I've heard. I mean, I'm sure there's some companies that do a good job of it, but it's not commonplace. And I think it needs to be commonplace. So by us speaking out, we are going to be educating others that way. So I really think that starting the conversation is key.
100%. And, on the flip side, people like you and I, sharing, we don't know where our managers, bosses, superiors are at in their journey, in what conversations they've had about physical, mental, emotional health, what they're used to in their personal lives. So to your point about the education and communication, just as much as it's our responsibility to own our part and communicate what's necessary, the expectation is not for our bosses to fix us. The expectation is not to find the solution in a work setting. It's to create a baseline. In my perspective, I wasn't looking for my boss to heal me. I just needed to say, I'm not going to have this deliverable due. So let's create a plan.
But the one important thing about that, Nicole, is that there are people in the past that I have been worked for me, or I have worked for, that have used some of their medical issues as excuses. And I think that the key with what you just said is, I'm not going to meet this deliverable, so let's make a plan.
Yes.
So it's coming to the table with a solution. Like, this is what's happening. This is a potential solution. This is what I need you to do. And this is what I could do.
Absolutely.
Rather just white flag, I can't do it, I'm out, because you're letting your whole team down. I mean, there are going to be situations, catastrophic situations that might happen. You're in an accident, whatever. But if you have some visibility to think ahead, to say, okay, I knew, like when I was going through I knew a flare was coming, or I knew it was going to get intense. Like, I'm going to have to leave to do some IVs. I'm going to have to get some treatments. Absolutely. Let me go talk to my boss and have a conversation. You have to give him the,
you have to show up.
Benefit. Yeah.
And, to really close the loop on the kind of building blocks that I think I can speak for both of us when I say are a great framework to check in addition to resources like the wellness check-in, what's happening with me? Then how is it affecting me professionally and those around me? And then on top of that, at a very macro level, what are companies doing to collaborate with their employees, or even lead them to resources like Secrets of Lemons, that really dives into the various aspects of this conversation, professionally, emotionally, family life, relationships, mental health, physical health, all of these different aspects, they're real for everyone. No employee is excluded from physical, mental, and emotional experiences, let alone chronic illness, mental health, et cetera. So, these sort of stages of how the process unfolds for those who really are in touch with what's going on, it doesn't have to be buttoned up. It is a vulnerable process and it can get messy, but just start the conversation. Start with someone you feel safe with, then go to the next person. Really just, it's okay to let people know where you're at.
I will like to add, in a professional manner.
Yes.
Right? So like no one needs to just air dirty laundry. I think
Fair.
Knowing that everybody has something. I mean, you have no idea. Your boss may have struggled 5 years ago with a kid who had cancer. I mean, you have no idea how someone's going to react. And he, by the way, might be resentful because he never said anything. And like, I dealt with that, you deal with this. That's like an old school mentality because people didn't, operate it differently then.
Yes.
I think that by educating those leaders who maybe might have that old resentment.
Absolutely.
And saying, hey, I know this is how we kind of operated before. Some people may think that this is the right way, but this is not our company's way. This is not how we're going to proceed.
Yep.
I think it's going to speak volumes. I hope we start the conversation. I mean, I do, but I really believe that it's a 50-50, just like in marriage, just like in any situation. You're not solely responsible and they're not solely responsible. You both have to come to the table, communicating realistic expectations, owning your shit, because that's really important, and then proceeding accordingly. It's possible that you have this conversation and you have someone who, fortunate for them, had never really gone through yet something devastating in their life, which good for them. And maybe they don't know how to respond.
Totally.
It's up for you to not really get offended, right?
Absolutely.
It's not about you. It's about them. And you say, you know what? I just want to be open about this conversation. Is there someone within the company that you think that would benefit? Maybe I could talk to, we could brainstorm. I want to make sure the deliverables are being met, but this is where I'm at physically right now. Whether that's a work home thing, thanks COVID really helped up also for that. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe your hour shift. I mean,
totally.
Literally Goldman let me go late. It's not that they let me, they were like, do you want to go lay down? I think because I looked like I was going to pass out several times. And I would pass out for 2 hours and I'd pop out and I would feel great. And I would go back to work. I mean, looking back, I don't know how healthy that was, but at the time, it worked.
Totally.
So I think that we just have to, again, just be open to trying new things. But the intention, I tell people all the time, particularly people when I was running Ostomy Secrets, and everyone I hired had medical issues. Everyone I hired had an ostomy. I knew what it was like, what they were dealing with. And people went through flares and they had issues. They had blockage, hospitalizations. We always communicated. But at the end of the day, a business is a business and you can't let people down. And you have to show up.
I think that's really where those resources come in. And, I use your check-in all the time.
Oh, I love that.
And that's something that I know you're going to share with all that are listening as an option. And, I will just say from a personal perspective, Lisa, you've been instrumental in my personal journey. And you shared with me that as a result of this discussion, there will be some support material that you can take with you beyond the check-in that will help navigate this conversation. What resources are available, a shoulder to lean on, stand on, cry on, whatever it is, that there are going to be an effort to share our journey with the intention to support others. The resources that you're going to make available are really instrumental. And I know so many people will be grateful for them.
Oh, thank you. Well, hopefully more to come on that. The next thing I'm battling right now, not battling, but I'm like trying to get as much useful information for people is medical insurance. Because that is one of the main reasons why people stay in unhealthy jobs or unhealthy situations. Not just
it's so hard to navigate.
It is so hard. And it has been a function of who I've been. I selected my first job because of medical insurance. I stayed in it longer than I should have because of that. It's caused a lot of financial pressure. And I think there are options out there.
Yes.
And we need to really educate ourselves. And it's really hard when you're in a world, I feel like everybody always wants to sell you something, So I just want to give people facts. So that's hopefully going to be the next. I'm working on talking right now with an insurance expert on some like top 10 tips of people to take away. So
yes.
For anyone who's listening, if you want to drop an email or a note with anything you want to hear more about, please do, because this is driven solely by comments on what people are looking for and information they need. That's how we're rolling.
And if it's anything like my experience, as soon as you start sharing, it feels good. I don't know how else to explain it.
I love it. Well, it's like it's a form of therapy, right? You don't have to hire a therapist. My girlfriend said the other day, Lisa, I said, did you talk to your therapist about this? She goes, why? I have you. You're going to tell me how I feel. A therapist will just, how did that make you feel? You're going to just say it right back to me in my face. It's very funny.
Totally.
True. So it is.
Totally.
So anyway,
awesome.
Well, I hope this helps somebody that's listening to it today.
Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me to share in this. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Bye.